Welcome to our Psychology of Gender class. I am Dr. Herb again, and we have had a little bit of an interruption in our class scheduling, but we've picked right back up again, and we will be having an exam on the next class. For this group, it's in 2 days. For those of you who are taking it on a TV, what you need to do is check your syllabus. And it's called a TV calendar or some kind of calendar that'll tell you where to go and when to go to take the test. And either I will be there with you to take the test, or my or a TA will be there. And you know, you drive to campus and take the test, and that's on your schedule, and it'll show you where to do. So today, actually, what we're going to do is we're going to review what's going to be on the test, the information we've done this last 6 classes, actually 5 classes, actually 6 classes. There you go. This is our 6th class. And information I think is important. I'm going to tell you what's on the test. Some of this stuff you'll just go to the book and look up and find, and then some of it is from the lectures. And I'm not going to test you on anything we haven't talked about or things I haven't pointed out that's important. So I don't want you to feel like you're majorly freaked out about the test. My bias is, as a psychologist, therapist, is I want you to learn this stuff, and I hope it stimulates some ideas that some of you who want to do research might be stimulated to do some more research about this. And if not that it would awaken you to concepts of gender and where does gender come from, and looking at your prejudices and ideas and in terms of masculine, feminine, male, female, and where that all comes from. So what I want to do today is I want to tell you what to look at for the exam, and then teach you 2 things. One, actually, these 2 things I've already taught in the last lecture about how the ego grows, and I think that's very important, because we'll find that the ego grows around approval, and so much of gender issues are around approval. When you're a little 3-year-old boy and you pick up the doll to play with, and Dad comes along and grabs it out of your hand and puts a gun in your hand and says, "I don't approve of you picking up Barbie dolls," the child often will repress their urge to pick up the Barbie doll, say, you know, a boy picking up a girl doll, because he wants approval from his parents. And yet that same child may be a, who's a designer, male designer, Armani or somebody? Who? Yes, whoever that is, I don't know. Or Ralph Lauren or something. That he mainly does women's clothes. Who does women's clothes? Who's a great? Shauna, Amy, who's a man who does women's designs?
I have no idea.
Besides Kmart and who? Yeah, Versace, of course. And but you see how somebody may have that we might call a feminine principle of beauty and you know artisticness, which we would tend to lean toward the feminine. But remember, men and women both have both within them. So we'll find that ego development is often around what's approved of and not approved of. That's a little example that'll make more sense. And again, we covered this in the last lecture, but I want to go over it again. But first, let's just look at the exam so you'll kind of know what to do and be prepared for it. Those of you here, you just show up here Thursday, and we'll do the exam. It may take 30, 45 minutes. I mean, it won't take too long, but you will have the full time to take it. And those of you on TV, show up and take the exam wherever you're supposed to take it. Okay, let's talk about review for the test. And what I've decided, since we actually missed a class because of technical difficulties beyond our control, I'm going to shorten some of the material. So first of all, we're just going to look at chapters 1, 2, and 3. Skip chapter 5. So these 20 multiple choice questions I'm going to give you come right out of chapters 1, 2, and 3. And then we're going to look, and then I only want you to have read she as opposed to he and she. Now, those of you who have read he, you'll be ahead of the game because we'll look at he next in our next classes, 6 or 7 classes before we have the next test. So, everybody feels a little relieved, I'm sure. So one of the questions that will be on the exam is why do men and women have different life experiences? And again, this is right out of our text on engendering psychology. Why do men and women have different life experiences? Is everybody taking copious notes? And the next one is there's the Benocratis and Fegan study about subtle sexism. What did they find? Let me write this down just so you'll see it. It's Benokratis and Fegan. Their study on subtle sexism. They found some interesting things on that, so you need to know what they found. See, it's sort of like Easter egg hunting or something. I give you enough to where you go dig and find it and go. And what happens in most of my classes is that this method of sort of studying is it keeps you from panicking, having to know lots of information, but it does focus on finding these answers. But in what may happen is in searching for the answer, you may stumble across something else. Thank you so much. Anyway, this is study. Another question on the multiple choice is, what is the determinant of deficiency in women, according to most research? Most research that talks about women are deficient. What are they saying determines women's deficiency? In the research that says women are deficient, what aspect determines that they're deficient? And again, for those of you that are consummate A students, I apologize for the simplicity of the exam, but I think you'll learn some stuff doing this. Another question I've asked is, what influences sex roles mostly, nurture or nature, biology or environment? And there's actually a section in that first chapter that talks about that. What does influence our sexual roles, nature or nurture? Another question is, how do stereotypes influence our information? How do stereotypes influence our information? I talked about it last week that archetypal energies are these sort of primal drives or longings or characteristics that are common to all human beings. And when we make an archetype energy a stereotype, we get in real trouble. And but in the text, you won't find the word archetype any place in there. But fear not, it's my job to teach about archetypes. But anyway, in terms of stereotypes influencing our information, how do they do that? Another question I thought it'd be interesting for you to know about is, in which countries do Williams and Best, Williams, oh my gosh, and Best, they found that certain countries have a positive view of females. So they did some research and found that certain countries have a positive view of females. And what were those countries, and what were the aspects of those countries? Again, these questions, you'll go, oh, that's interesting, fascinating. You may not be fascinated, but you may be interested. And you may be relieved, because then you know the answer for the test. I find that only the professor gets fascinated and interested. Okay, another question is, what's the most important change necessary for improvement of women's condition in the world. What's the most important change necessary for improving women's conditions in the world? And the subtitle of this book is Bringing Women into Focus. Most all the gender textbooks now are obviously trying to deal with the effect of patriarchy and trying to acknowledge women's rights, and rightly so. As you find that in the text, and all these texts do that, and because as you know, there's huge change going on in our culture regarding gender and gender issues. This is a quick aside, but see, what's interesting is the studies show that there's more of a minimalist view as opposed to a maximalist view on difference between men and women. That in fact, in the stuff that I read, it's like research that they used to do. They're redoing research in terms of verbal abilities, spatial abilities, math skills, different things. And they're discussing as they redo these tests more and more, they're finding less differences. And even the differences that do exist with men and women are more minimal differences than maximum differences. And
that question?
Say it again. The question again was, what's the most important change necessary for improvement of women's conditions? And the next question is, what is social constructionism? It's always nice academic psychobabble. Social construction. Oh my gosh, are you? Just the other day I was at a dinner party and we were talking about social constructionism. And when I mentioned it, everybody looked the other way. But actually it's a very important concept in terms of understanding gender issues. And that all the texts talk about social constructionism. And actually, I just talked about it a minute ago, but you can look it up and find out what that is, because I do ask it on one of the multiple choice deals. But anyway, that'll be a hunt and peck kind of thing. And then another question is, and this kind of moves over into chapter 2, where we talked about religion and social effects on men and women, is what Judeo-Christian group ascribes that women are inferior. That women are all things inferior. What Judeo-Christian group? So it either comes out of the Hebrew tradition or the Christian tradition. What Judeo-Christian group ascribes that women are all things inferior? So it won't be a Muslim or Hindu or Buddhist speaking about that. So another question is, what religion scapegoats women for the origin of sin? Everything cool out there, Amy and Shauna?
Yes.
Yes. You probably know the answer to that question, don't you?
Probably Christianity.
Bingo. Don't say it too loud, because people see and hear and on TV, see they're all going to get the answer because you said it. So kind of keep it under wraps.
Sorry.
See, I set you up. We make a good team. I set them up, you bowl them over. Okay. They told me they wanted not only a class, but good show, good program. So you guys are adding to this. Okay, according to the text, what religious leader had the most progressive views on women? And that was surprising when I came across that in our text. What religious leader had the most progressive views on women? I'm not sure it's always actualized out by that religious group, but the leader had some real progressive views. And I'm not going to ask you what you think it is, because, see, you'll get it right, and then everybody will know another question. And by the way, there are 20 multiple choice, and each one counts 3 points. And then you'll answer 8 short answers, and each one will count 5 points, which comes up to 100 in my math. Okay, another question is, what does social cognition research find regarding stereotyping? Let me write this down. Social cognition research regarding stereotyping. What did they find out? Another one is, another question is, and I'm sorry again, this is so easy, but what Judeo-Christian story seems to set up patriarchy? What Judeo-Christian story seems to set up patriarchy? And again, that's it right out of your text, and most of you could probably figure that one out. But and again, one of the things I do in my tests are meant to inform you. Hopefully, the test is a way for you to learn something. So you may, if you're not surprised by that, I hope you see that how tremendously our religious contexts and stories create a lot of subtle sexism, and often in the name of God or in the name of higher power and authority, and without re-looking at the story and the meaning of the story. I think the archetypal energies are very powerful in all sacred stories. We get in trouble when we literalize myth, when we literalize story, because remember, stories are full of truth, but they're not necessarily full of fact. And it's interesting how if I said, gee, that guy's a rat, everybody would understand what I was talking about, because you wouldn't realize, you wouldn't think he had little funky ears and a long tail. You wouldn't think a rat. You would think, a sly, kind of a really a bad person, an untrustworthy person. And even to throw this term out, which I'm sure is not politically correct, but if you say, boy, that woman's really a fox, well, everybody knows what we're talking about in terms of she has a lot of Aphrodite energy, perhaps, and very sensual looking or shapely or something. But nobody thinks of a little furry animal with a bushy tail, and, when you say fox, you immediately don't literalize that. You keep the metaphor alive. But it so happens when we get into religion and sacred stories, people just literalize it all. And I've often wondered why they do that, because I guess we're taught that way, living in fear and trying to control the future. But the power is in the myth, the power is in the metaphor, much more in the literalism of it. But we'll look at some more of that next month. Okay, so another question is, what did Freud view as gender determination? What did Freud view? Sigmund Freud, someone said. Sigmund Freud, what did he view as gender determination? I think we're moving on probably into chapter 3 by now. And then in Freud's model, what is the male's greatest fear? And we didn't list that in the fears we talked about a couple of classes ago, but perhaps it would be in there. Let's see. Well, fear of separation or something like that. But what did Freud view as the male's greatest fear? And then what are estrogen and progesterone, and what are their functions? See, what's kind of fun about this class is we go from science to history, tradition to myth, estrogen and progesterone. Yeah, what are estrogen and progesterone, and what are their functions? Hormones. And what sex has that? I guess they both we all have that, don't we? But they're most prominent in females, obviously. Another question is, studies show which organ is most determinant for psychosexual development? All the studies keep coming back to this theme of which organ of the body is most determinant for psychosexual development. Do y'all have a clue about that, Shauna?
I think I do. I think I remember reading something about that.
Good.
But I'm not 100%.
Okay, throw it out there. Let's just see if you're close.
Is it the brain?
Well, let's pretend like it's not, so we don't give that one away. But that's pretty darn close. Yeah, if it's not the brain, whatever is in second place is so far. If it's not the brain, well, you're right. Let's just hang with that one. Okay. That is. Did you find that rather interesting, or?
Yes, actually I did. And it had something to do with the hormones.
Absolutely.
In the blood or something.
Absolutely.
That was interesting.
It is, absolutely. Another question is this Carroll and Wolpe study. The Carroll and Wolpe study regarding female babies worldwide. Is a very fascinating study. And what did that study find? That's a great question. And this is, there's a lot of literature about this stuff in and out of the news, but I think to be really on the avant-garde of trying to make the world a better place, this study will stagger you if you don't know about the Carroll-Wolfe study. It may become very staggering about what's going on with female babies around the world. So there's a question on that. And another one is, and again, I apologize for this, what's the chromosome makeup of males and females? And then along with that, another question I have is on what's a hermaphrodite? Let's see. What is it? Is it an hermaphrodite or a hermaphrodite? Good question. An. It is an because of the H or something. Hermaphrodite. So know about that. Okay. So that's the gist of the multiple choice questions, and there were lots of places to go with a lot of that, and those are questions I thought that would be good for the little test, and perhaps. Okay, now I have 9 short answer questions, and the neat thing about short answer questions for me is I get to see how you're thinking if you're getting these concepts. On short answer questions, myself and my graders absolutely love bullets. We love bullets. Does everybody know what a bullet is? Do y'all know what bullets are? Okay. Let me show you bullets for those that don't know bullets. Bullets, you can't use bullets and sort of make it simple, but you can use bullets to make it clear. It's not meant to, it's just meant to make it clear and get the answer quickly. And on the short answer test, it'll be on the paper, so you'll need to write on the paper. If you need to use the back, you can. But one of the questions is, what is gender? What's the term gender mean? And what's the difference between sexual identity and gender identity? And how are each determined? Sexual identity versus gender identity. What's the difference and how are they determined? And again, this is mostly from the lectures, although this is from the textbooks too. And another question I thought was interesting, particularly when we move into archetypal energies, is to connect it with the somatic manifestations. Is what are the Wolfian ducts and Millenarian ducts? The Wolfian. Remember those? We studied those in the book and stuff. And what's significant about each of these? And then what determines their disposition? And again, that's in the lectures. You probably have in your notes, but it's also right out of the book. You can look up that section and talk about that. The Wolfian ducts, Millenarian ducts, and what are they? Define them. And then what determines the disposition, like what happens to each one of them, and then what's the result of when one is disposed of or not disposed of. I think these Wolfian and Millenarian ducts, I think that for me it's fascinating, is that whenever you see another human being, you have to acknowledge that the masculine and feminine lie within everyone. And you'll see to which degree parts are developed or not developed in people's behavior. So we're sort of making a quantum leap from physical manifestations to archetypal issues. But anyway, we'll look at that later. Another one is, and I've asked this before in other classes, is what is the explain and define individuation, individuality, and individualism. Hi, Kim. Explain individuation, individuality, individualism. And again, the part of why I'm asking that question, part of why we look at that, is that the hope for the world is that we all become, if we individuate and become individuals, and are not sort of stifled by cultural definitions and roles about who you should be, ought to be, supposed to be, have to be, which often stifles our gender identity in many other ways. Okay, and another one is Max Weber's 3 types of authority, 3 sources of authority. It's right out of the lectures. And you need to be able to define and describe each. And here's the dilemma I get. And also, you might note, and also I want you to note how each one lines up with facets of the personality. Remember, we talked about tradition often has to do with our superego or persona or our ego ideal. Remember that? Do y'all remember that out there?
Wait, lines up with what?
With facets of our personality. Remember how I talked about that a couple of lectures ago? And how ego is often around our rational power and how we define ourselves with our conscious world. Anyway, just noting which ones line up, I think it's interesting. Again, this isn't based on scientific research per se, but it's sort of drawing from our charismatic authority of honoring where the values that we have, where they come from. Anyway, and one of the things with the 3 sources of authority is, see, one of the problems I have as a grader, or if I grade them, or my grader grades them, is there'll be some of you that'll put 1 or 2 words, and you may say tradition, traditional authority, customs, values, and but then there'll be other students who'll put 4 or 5 words. And from the grader standpoint, it's as if this person understands this concept more, and so they'll get a better grade. And for each of these will be worth 5 points. Someone who puts 3 or 4 words and maybe seems to grasp a concept, as a person who 1 or 2, they're going to get a 5, or somebody else will get a 4 because they seem to grasp the concept better. And again, the idea is not to overwhelm us with verbiage, but it's to grasp the concept. And see, that's the dilemma every grader has to deal with. Is like, because what happens is you guys end up sorting yourself out, and it's, you know, so you give, it's sort of like who understands the material better. That's why a student comes and say, well, I got it, I put two things right, and you go, well, yeah, but see, I have to compare this to other students who seem to understand the concept better. So when I say use bullets and be, you know, to the point, I'm not saying minimalize your answer. Any questions on that? Does that kind of make sense? Y'all been around long enough to see it when we study, that's what it is. And I recognize that a lot of this stuff is I've given you information, we've discussed some of it, a lot of it, and then you give it back to me, but that's pretty much how we test this. And another question I have, and again you can answer, is Robert Johnson's book, She is What Are the Four Tasks that Aphrodite assigns to Psyche? And again, that doesn't require a long answer, although it does require understanding what the tasks are.
Do you mind repeating that question one more time?
No, I don't mind repeating it. Yeah, what are the four tasks that Aphrodite assigns to Psyche? This is from our little book, She. And and so we're just going to look at she. We're not going to look at he for this test. And again, the reason I want you to get this is I think this is profound in terms of developing one's unfolding individuation and identity in relation to one's understanding one's gender and femininity, masculinity, becoming a whole person. And the interesting thing about is these four tasks seem to be, using this model of mythology, four tasks essential for a woman to actualize her feminine psychology, by integrating her masculine side. We'll look at more of this in the next part of the class. But anyway, those four tasks, and again, they're in the book, and what each task means about a woman's psychological development. You know, the one on sorting, for example, where she has to sort the beans and the things. But what does that mean? What is a woman trying to sort out? And again, that in the book, it's pretty to the point, and if you'll get it. Another question is, and we've gone over this in class, is what are the three functions of the ego? Define the ego. What is ego? And what are the three functions of the ego in serving our consciousness? And do y'all have that on your notes? Remember, the ego as the center of our decision-making abilities, and and the center of our willpower, ego development. And then what are the three main functions of the ego? Does anybody know what I'm talking about? Okay, thank you. If just two or three of you say yes, then everyone should know because we've covered it. And gender identity is so much related to ego development. And then the other question I have, and I think we had 7, but if you just give me, say, 6 fears the ego must overcome. And 6 fears the ego must overcome. Fear of being smothered, fear of being abandoned. You remember those, Amy, Shauna?
Yes.
Okay. And then what's the effect of too much unconditional love and too little unconditional love on the child's personality? And we covered that, I think, for a couple of classes. This can tremendously affect the awakening of certain archetypes. I have that as also. Say it again.
That one more time. Could you please repeat that?
Yeah, what are the 6 fears the ego must overcome, and then what's the effect of too much unconditional love and too little unconditional love on the
Thank you.
child's personality. And then a couple of more questions. And again, all you have to do is answer 8 of these 9 questions. You can omit one of them. You can omit several if you want to. But and another one of what I want to talk about today, although we covered in last class also, was list and briefly explain the human needs around which the ego grows. In other words, what grows the ego? And then what happens to those rejected aspects of the personality? And I recognize that some of you in my class here are going, I have no clue what you're talking about, but you will because we're going to cover it in a few minutes. So what human needs around which the ego grows, and what happens to aspects that are rejected by authority figures? We'll look at that. And then another one which that we've covered before is what are 2 paths, the male and female patterns that Carroll cites as a result of patriarchy. And this is really about ego development. It'll be our final discussion of ego development. Is what are 2 paths, or the male pattern, female pattern, these 2 paths that Carroll cites as a result of patriarchy. And again, some of you don't have information for that, but I'll give it to you, and you can give it back on the exam from that. Okay, that's kind of a review. That is a review. That is our review. So these last 2 questions I want to lecture on now and talk about as a way of... Yeah, the last one is what are the 2 paths that Carroll Pearson, P-E-A-S-R-N, cites as a result of patriarchy. And the 2 paths are the male pattern, male path, the female pattern. And I want to get to that after we talk about how the ego grows. See, this all has meaning in its madness. For me, it has sort of a logical unfolding sequence that how ego develops. And okay, any questions on all that? Okay, and you guys, you need to bring a Scantron and mark on the Scantron, and also mark on your test. Did the big Scantron, the bigger one? Yeah, the blue one, the blue Scantron. Okay, let's talk a little bit about we talked about the purpose of the ego, and let's talk about how the ego grows and what has to happen for ego to develop. And when we look at ego growing, remember one of the purposes of ego is to develop an identity. And since this class is on gender, and gender identity is largely related to the ego's discovering itself and defining itself, sort of the ego is sort of the clothes we wear, the identity we wear through this journey. And it's sort of maybe what carries us through life is the ego development. And you have to have good grounded sense of ego development in order to function and become your true self. Because if you're not sort of grounded in ability to stand on your own feet and ability to have a sense of who you are and how you define yourself, you're going to have a hard time unfolding and changing and becoming what your true identity may be under that. But most psychology is only about ego development, and most people in our culture just care about the ego getting what the ego wants, that the ego might manifest itself. And my theory is, and analytical psychology, is there's just more to life than the ego. There's the deeper self, the truer self, and we draw the little our iceberg theory, that there's a whole lot more to who we are than the top tip of the iceberg. Okay, so how does the ego grow? The ego grows, and I know this is a review for some of you, it grows around 3 aspects. It grows around gratification, and that is satisfying pain. through soothing. And you think when the child is fed, when the child is held, it's satiating our needs. To the degree our needs get satiated and we get gratified, then the ego feels safe and we can get grounded. Meeting needs to lessen pain. It's around the ego grows when it is comforted. And when it's comforted, it says, I can trust life. And when you think about the importance of that, your ego, your ability to make decisions, your ability to have willpower to advance or retreat, as I often tell my clients in my office, is that healthy living is the ability to advance or retreat from any position at any time according to what you feel like you need to do to take care of yourself. And if you don't take care of yourself, who's going to do it? See, and it's that whole concept of good ego development. Taking a risk on your own behalf, making decisions, staying, fleeing, fighting for something, waiting for something, all requires pretty strong ego development. And of course, the more you give your children a chance to make their choices, and here just gratifying their needs, food, clothing, shelter, holding, it grounds them that life can be trusted. In Erickson's stages of development, that first one about trust versus mistrust, is because those basic needs are met. And all of you can be grateful to your parents, your mother, primary caregiver, who and father, whether they were male or female or whatever, that your primary caregivers got you food, clothing, shelter in those first 18 months of life. 2 years of life, you got your needs met. And because you wouldn't be able to be taking this class or sitting here functioning if you didn't have that. Your ego is not allowed to grow because it's got its needs satiated. And you can't minimize that. So when we look at a world full of people who are not getting fed and not getting their needs met, and we live in a culture that 20% of the children in America are below the poverty line. And in Europe it's like under 10% or something. And it seems insidious as a culture that we, and all of these people that are struggling and they don't get their basic needs met will one day be adults who are meant to actualize their needs, and who knows which of those children will figure out how to grow wheat in the desert. And so getting basic human needs met is an essential aspect of development. So gratifying. Ego grows around gratification. The second thing it grows around is stimulation. And stimulation tells the ego it is. It is, that it exists. And that can be, from you look at the child, from touch, speaking to the child, feeding, reading, playing. Those mobiles, is that what it is? They have in a crib that the little child kind of, moves around, that stimulates the child. Anything that challenges by stimulation is challenges or awakens. Is the ego grows when it's challenged and awakened. The infant will not prosper if it's not stimulated. The infant will not prosper if it's not stimulated. See, we are awakened to the environment. Through stimulation. And, you know, as we talked about, the ego grows over the first 14 years, but at some level we grow throughout all of life, particularly the experiences you can have that cause, you know, the ego to grow, because it's taken out of that safe little world that grounds it into a bigger world that causes itself to expand. I remember my daughter was probably 8 years old one semester, maybe 9. It was in the fall of the year, and about early in December, maybe around Thanksgiving, she came and she says, "Hey, Dad, I was just thinking, if I spend the night out or have someone over for the next 3 Friday nights, I will have done it every Friday this semester." And I said, "Laura, you got to go for the gold. This is wonderful, unbelievable." And, you know, and here at 8 years old or 9 years old, many parents would go, "Oh, I don't want my child doing that," you know. No, they're not ready to do that. But see, she had confidence, and, you know, it was causing her ego to grow because she was stimulating new places, new people, new experiences. And ego grows with that. Stimulate. In some of our studies of gender and toys that kids play with, all different kinds of toys and experiences stimulate the ego to grow. Playing with same-sex, different sex, you know, the studies show, and there's a film on this that I'm not able to show here, how boys tend to hang with boys and girls with girls, even at very, very young ages. And all of that stimulates the ego to grow and develop. And then there comes a time where they start meeting the opposite sex and hanging with them, and all that stimulates new awareness and ideas. And when a child wants to pick up a toy that's, quote, the culture says is not gender appropriate, well, picking that up and being interested in it is a way of stimulating the ego to grow. So as any time we awaken the environment and stimulate the ego to grow further, we serve the ego to develop, and that's crucial. So there's a sense of, you know, exposing children and people, other cultures, races, experiences of life, you know, sort of age appropriate, is really important for development. I've met a lot of teenagers over the years in my practice who have much more maturity, awareness, sense of who they are, because their parents have allowed them to explore life. And I've met people in their 30s and 40s who are very immature because they've stayed in some little bubble and don't have permission to get outside the box in their thinking and their experiences. And so therefore they don't have good, healthy, you know, ego development. And you can imagine how learning about masculine and feminine, male and female, as opposed to being categorized and stereotyped, can stifle or enlarge gender development. Any questions on that, or comments, or stimulating? Let me just say this on stimulating, how, because a frequent question I get when I do parenting seminars are parents, rightly so, as children begin to go off to see movies and R-rated movies, and how do you decide, you know, when PG and R-rated? And, you know, here's a student that's 12, 13, 14, and the parents are saying, well, no, these are R-rated, there's too much sex and violence, and I'm not, you know, it's not appropriate for you to see that. And one of the ways I like to handle that is it becomes a great opportunity, because, see, the students are going to see it anyway. They're going to see it at somebody's house at a slumber party, and they're going to find a way to see it because they're curious. And remember, their ego grows through stimulation by gaining new knowledge and experiences. And rather than resist that, I like to go with it and say, well, here's the reasons I don't like you seeing these movies. One is they use a lot of violence to solve problems because people aren't able to discuss their differences. They just use infantile, primitive reactivity to deal with problems through violence. And you know, that's not the way we solve problems. And secondly is they use women as objects and things, and as sex objects for gratification and stimulation, and as if a woman's body is more important than her brain. And so I don't like the way women are used in movies, and even some way men are used, but particularly women tend to be demeaned and treated as only sexual objects. And third is the language, the four-letter words and all. And these usually come from people who don't have an education, who don't know how to express their feelings. And so four-letter words become a shortcut to, emotive expression because people don't know how to say what's on their mind. And in our family, what we want to do is honor people for who they are, not treat them as objects. And we want to solve our problems through nonviolent means. And we want to be able to express what we feel. So the problem I have is these movies tend to really cheapen the human experience. But you know what? I want you to go see and tell me what you think. And there's some 12, 13, 14-year-olds who are like, well, thanks. You mean you trust me? Yeah. I want you to go and see when you come and let's talk about it. And I'm telling you, 9 times out of 10, the teenager will so appreciate that you trust them to make those evaluations and those decisions as they are stimulated by these things. And it brings, grist for the mill of discovery and of dialogue between parents and teens about that. What do you think about that? And students can pick all that up very easily. So what's the problem, really? Isn't it often that the parents have not come to terms with those issues? And so the parent wants to keep the emerging child, the emerging adult, away from it because the parent's not there. And most studies show that actually when you get in and wrestle and evaluate and look at these stimulating things, you actually assimilate it and find a place for it in its proper, improper way. Any questions on that? Does that sort of make sense, or any comments? Some of you are nodding your head, but but the choice is to not have stimulation, and therefore people don't grow and develop because they don't gain the confidence that's necessary for ego development. And how you do that is sort of the dance of life, isn't it? Parenting, growing up is more art than science, and it's a new thing for all of us. But I sort of err on overstimulating for transformation rather than understimulating for stifling. And we're going to err either way. Or as someone said, it's better to, and again, this is not a maximum, this is just to stimulate your thinking. It may be better to share too much too soon than too little too late. See? But if I'm going to share too much too soon, then I want to be there to dialogue and talk and share. These are my fears, here's my concerns, but I want you to be able to come to terms with that. And I don't like these prejudices, I don't like the way women are portrayed, I don't like the way these movies seduce our minds with these things. But you find that most students, particularly preteens and teens, they are able to separate fantasy from reality. And particularly when you talk about it and see that everything that's going on a movie screen or on a TV screen, everything is canned and redone over and over and over to just get the right effect. Because it's not real, see. But their purpose is to stimulate you, unfortunately, to come buy the ticket to go to the movie. Every now and then a movie will come along and they actually want to stimulate your soul and your mind to be a larger person. But anyway, so stimulation. The third thing the ego grows around, and I just love that ripping it apart for some reason, is the ego grows around approval. APPROVAL. And the first is with parents. I say 0 to 7 years, and then parents and peers from 7 to 14 years, and then parents, peers, and self from 14 to 21, 28, 35. These in 7-year cycles. This is probably adolescence in our culture, probably goes from 14 to 28-ish, early 30s. We finally begin to leave our adolescence. searching for identity, searching for who we are, our sexuality, how we're going to make a living, how we're going to function in the world. But you see, our approval is the ego grows around approval, and approval says you belong. B-E-L-O-N-G. You're wanted. You're okay. Attaboy. Attagirl. So you're a girl and you want to go study engineering, and you don't want to be a debutante. You don't want frilly girly clothes. You like, you want to be an astronaut, or you want to be a fighter pilot or something. Attagirl. I approve of that. Or you're a boy in a predominantly macho culture, and the boy says, I want to play the violin. Attaboy. I approve of that. It's okay for you to be who you want to be and do what you want to do with your life. I approve of that. Or you awaken to your homosexuality. And for a parent to be able to say, I love you and accept you, I approve of who you are. And if you don't realize how gay and lesbian people go through tremendous issues of identity and rejection. So I have so much admiration for many gay and lesbian people, because they've had to overcome so much disapproval, see, as they struggle for their sense of identity. And it takes tremendous courage in the face of rejection of caregivers whose approval you desperately needed to form an ego, to suddenly say, well, me being me, I may have to walk away from the approval of those people at one time I couldn't live without their approval. It takes tremendous courage to first to discover one's identity, because often it can be very confusing, and then to claim it in the face of rejection, and then to live it out, living with the rejection. But what's one approval you can't live without, and that's the approval of yourself. And so I don't want to minimize the importance of ego development and approval, because it is a fact, it's essential. Approval is the sense to be me. And it is, let me see over here. And so what is not approved of, the ego cannot contain in consciousness what is not approved of, and so what it is not approved of is put into the unconscious. And we create defenses around these. Ego defenses. So what's not approved of? What's not approved by the caregivers, you have to deal with that. And so what do we do with it? Is we actually dump it into the unconscious. And we dump it 3 basic ways. We repress it. And repress means to put back. And it can be a child who, and I use these examples partly because I can't think of any others, but I'm sure there are many. It's the child who is an artist. I remember years ago a friend of mine who his father was a football coach, and his older brother was all-state, all-American in college eventually. And he was asked to follow along, but he actually was an artist and has become a very famous sculptor. And but he told me one time about how difficult it was, because he wanted to go to art class. He was sort of Ferdinand in right field in his athletic prowess, looking at the flowers. And but he got tremendous shame and put down for always doodling with colors and doodling with clay. And he said he started at blocking dummy all through high school because his dad was a coach. Nobody knows what that is, a blocking dummy. You know what blocking dummy is. He said he hated being out there, but he couldn't live with his father's rejection because his father was a bit of an automaton and authoritarian. And, of course, his father had what? Repressed his own artistic talents, the father, and his own sensitivity to life, to beauty and wonder, which we might call the feminine side of life. His father had repressed all of that and was sort of the more macho and skewed one is, the chances are the other part's been repressed. And this son was quite artistic and actually not a bad athlete. But he talked about how he repressed it for years. And then when he got off in college, an art teacher said, basically, pulled him away and mentored him. You see, from your father, you get food, clothing, and shelter, but you don't get mentoring from father. Mentoring is someone who says, this is who you are, come on. And so many of us expect that from father or mother, but that's not their role. Their role is to give us food, clothing, and shelter, and nurturing to build an ego to step out into the world. But we get our permission to be ourselves often from someone else, a teacher, another relative, a neighbor, Sunday school leader, scout leader, coach, somebody who sees who we are and calls us forth. People spend a lot of their life being angry. Often people are angry that their mentor is not providing for them. And their mentor's job is to call forth. The parent's job is to provide. And sometimes when you have parents that don't provide, you have to start providing for yourself real quickly. And so it gets you on your journey into self-discovery. But so what is not approved of is either repressed, which means it's put back. In our little analogy here, that means it came into consciousness and went back down. And it sits here waiting to be discovered again. Next is suppressed. And suppression, it's never up. It never comes up. Or it never has come up. Let's put it that way. It never has come up. So it's been held down. And much in later life we'll find gifts and talents that will emerge that were held down. Suppression. It's never come up. It's interesting. It's not on here, but it would be an emotional thing, is depression means to hold down. So when someone is depressed, that means they're holding something in the unconscious that is weighting them down, holding them down. They're depressed. And of course, given the choice between holding it down and letting it up and facing the anxiety and fear of like, oh my gosh. See, usually the fear of acknowledging something is so great, we hold it down in the unconscious until it works itself out. And then given the choice, anxiety is always better than depression. Because anxiety, you're facing it, which takes tremendous moral courage. You're having to face something. But when someone is ready to face it, is something for the gods and the deep soul to come to terms with. You can never tell somebody, it's time for you to stop being depressed. You say, well, you have no idea what's being held down, and most times we don't know what we're holding down. That's why psychotherapy can be very helpful to help us look at it. What am I afraid to let come up? Hold the beach ball under the water. It takes a lot more energy to hold it down than to let it up. But to let it up is to face fears that we think will overwhelm us. But it takes courage to face the fears and the anxiety around the fears. Okay, and then the third thing we do with it is what? What do you think it is, Amy or Shauna, that we do with the third thing? We do with the things that are not approved of and accepted. Some of you had me before in class. What do we do with it? Well, we project it. We project. And project means to throw out. The things that I don't accept or approve of within myself, I am going to project on you. And the things I hate in you are things in me I haven't come to terms with. The things I adore and worship in you are things I haven't come to terms with within myself. See? And to the degree I acknowledge my masculine and feminine and all the, of course we'll never understand all of them, but actualize, the more I actualize of my own personhood, the more I don't have to project on you. So again, if we are what we hate, and we are what we love. So one of the ways I grow as a person is I have to say, what is it about you that I hate that's really in me I have to come to terms with? What is it about you that I love and adore that's really in me, or otherwise I wouldn't adore it in you. It wouldn't be awakened in me by you if it wasn't in me. So these are things that are intolerable to the ego. The things that are intolerable to the ego because they're disapproved of get repressed, suppressed, or projected out. It's almost a classical that in the fundamentalism is projecting the evil out there that people won't embrace within. Fundamentalism, this need for surety in all things, to be in control, that God's in control and everything's right and in its place. And what happens in our fundamentalism, we project doubt and the unknown of the infidels onto somebody else because we haven't embraced our own doubt. In fact, faith requires doubt, and doubt will get you to faith. But if we say, well, no, I've got to know that I know that I know, see what we're doing is, the fact is nobody knows. And so what we do is we project out all those infidels out there who have no faith, when in fact we're not acknowledging our own lack of faith in life because you don't know. That's why it's called faith. You can't be assured of things. Okay, so projection, we'll look at more of this. And projection becomes our own shadow, and it becomes our complexes. We'll look at this later. But that has tremendous effect on gender identity. Much of homophobia is because people have not come to terms with issues in their own psychic world. Just acknowledging the multitudes, as Walt Whitman talks about, that lie within us. And as you can tell, and we've looked at in our studies, that you can see how our religious ideation have much to do with repressing, suppressing, and projecting in terms of gender and male and female roles in these issues. And this sort of sets up some important stuff that we'll look at as we go forth. Any questions on that, kind of? Well, we got about 8 minutes, and I want to talk about this last thing. These two patterns, and it's really kind of quickly. But there's two paths that Pearson talks about. She's the lady that did our wheel on archetypes. And she says there's two paths or patterns in the male pattern, which is kind of an archetypal pattern, is that the male pattern begins with arrogance or hubris, which is sort of too much ego. And then in the male pattern, one must sacrifice ego. See, there's too much egocentricity. Ego is good. Egocentricity will get you in a lot of trouble. And so in the male pattern, there's beginning with arrogance, pride, pretentiousness, hubris, sort of we're bad, we can handle everything. There's too much egocentricity. And ultimately must sacrifice ego to achieve humility. Or individuation. And she cites that as men's and women's journeys often originate from different dilemmas and are informed by different psychological and spiritual problems. The typical male pattern, which we have been taught to see as the classic heroic pattern. See, that's the hero pattern. Begins in arrogance or hubris and thus requires sacrifice of the ego to achieve humility, to find one's individuation or true identity. And then she cites the female pattern, You know, and I'm not sure, you know, I'm going to talk the feminine pattern and the masculine pattern. Because remember, these patterns can occur both in men and women. And the feminine pattern sort of begins in, it begins in humility and submission. And see, by saying female pattern, that could be men born in slavery, or whole cultures or races that are born one down. And there's too little ego, or a woman born with, you know, she doesn't count because she's in a patriarchal society. Pearson says this is a result of patriarchy. It's a result of patriarchy. This is what these themes have come down, and so her task is she must, or the feminine pattern is a person must find worth and the healthy ego to make a contribution. So we have often women overemphasize relationships and devalue herself. A woman overemphasizes relationships and devalues self. It's overemphasis on others, devalue self. And then the masculine or male pattern, as I said, would be just the opposite, wouldn't it? It's emphasis on self and achievement. That'd be the ego self and achievement. Can you read that, guys? Overemphasis on self and achievement, and there's a devaluing of dependency needs and support from others. Oh, it looks like a mess, but maybe you can follow it. So Pearson talks about these two patterns. This is a question on the test, and you can answer it or not answer it. But these two patterns, this masculine pattern or male pattern, begins with arrogance and hubris, too much egocentricity, and the hero must sacrifice the egocentricity to find humility and true identity. You see that? Have y'all seen that working? You see it in stories and maybe our own journey. And then the second one is around the feminine pattern, beginning with humility and submission, having to find one's ego and find one's sense of self in order to, must find one's own worth and everything. Y'all buying this? Is everybody buying what I'm selling? Amy, Shauna, y'all buying this?
Sounds about right.
Sounds about right. Okay, well, you know, we're just scratching the elephant we're walking around for learning about gender. But that's kind of an interesting test question easy test question. So we've looked at ego growing around gratification, stimulation, and approval, and then what's not approved of gets dumped into the unconscious. Either it's repressed, it came up and got put back down, or it's suppressed, it's still there. And as I look out at you guys here and all you on TV, which I can't see, I'm wondering how much of your life has been repressed, suppressed. And one way you can learn about that is what's projected. Because we project what is suppressed, we project what is repressed. And again, you make a list of who you don't like and why you don't like them. You find your shadow and who you like, and you'll find your gold, that part of the shadow. And then we look at these two paths, this masculine pattern and feminine pattern from Carroll Pearson. And that's kind of a neat way to go. Okay, so I will see you all here Thursday. Does anybody feel overwhelmed? You do a little bit? Well, I hope you don't. It'll be fun. You get to give me back what you've learned, and we'll have fun. And those on TV, I'll see you. You'll come in for your test next time, and I'll see you, or the grader will see you. Bye-bye.